And oh, law suddenly no more. A judge strikes down in-state tuition for undocumented students in Texas. We'll have details on that story today on The Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Other stories today. What changes can Texans expect for energy and the environment after this week's conclusion of the 89th Texas Legislature? Reporters from across the state provide some answers. Also, new legislation aimed at reducing or mitigating the impact of wildfires in Texas. Fresh concerns about the return of a devastating screwworm. Texas has seen these pests before. Standard's Michael Marks takes a look back. Also, the Texas sheriffs working with federal immigration enforcement, Tesla's autonomous taxis, and more when the Standard gets underway, right after this. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 5th day of June 2025. I'm David Brown. One of the top stories in Texas today: the sudden disappearance of a 24-year-old law allowing undocumented students to receive in-state tuition. Within 9 hours of a Justice Department court filing yesterday, the Attorney General's office in Texas sided with the Trump administration, which argued that, to quote U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, under federal law, schools cannot provide benefits to illegal aliens that they do not provide to U.S. citizens, end quote. According to the Texas Tribune, Texas quickly asked the court to side with the feds, and U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor did just that. This will affect some 20,000 undocumented students in Texas who've been receiving this benefit. This was a policy enthusiastically supported when it was launched by former Republican Governor Rick Perry. At least one organization has vowed to fight the decision. We'll hear more in the Texas News Roundup a little later in the broadcast. As for other more recent legislation, 1,200 bills passed before the gavel dropped on the 89th Texas Legislature earlier this week. With the just concluded session still top of mind, it's worth noting that many of the laws just passed related to energy and the environment are worth taking a closer look at, and our reporting partners statewide with the Texas Newsroom have been doing just that. And the changes they add up to for Texans are quite interesting, assuming Governor Abbott signs them into law. We begin with efforts to increase the state's water supply. KTTZ's Brad Burt reports from Lubbock.
At the start of the session, Governor Abbott said Texas needed to make a, quote, generational investment in water. The availability of groundwater here is expected to decline by 25% by 2070, while the demand for water could double even sooner. Farmers and ranchers depend on groundwater for irrigation, which currently puts the highest demands on the state's water supply. L'Oreal Stepney is chairwoman for the Texas Water Development Board. She told lawmakers that demand could shift to growing cities before 2060.
Our municipal demand is steadily increasing and will surpass irrigation. Municipal is going to be the number one user, and it'll be here before we know it.
SB 7 clears the path for $1 billion new dollars annually in the Texas Water Fund. It'll be used to find new water sources and repair the infrastructure that carries it across Texas, a possible relief for farmers from the Rio Grande Valley to the Panhandle. Speaking of the Panhandle, that region was also the site of historic wildfires in 2024, including the largest ever recorded in Texas. Most of the firefighting in rural areas is done by volunteers, and this year the legislature also passed a bill to increase potential grant funding and resources for those volunteer departments. Both bills, fire and water, are waiting for Governor Abbott's signature. Up next, we hear from Mose Bushell from KUT in Austin about changes Texas lawmakers made and didn't make to the state's power grid.
One big question going into this session was whether lawmakers would curb the massive growth of renewable energy in Texas. Bills like SB 715 and SB 388 aim to cap renewable power on the grid or make it harder and more expensive to build. Supporters said it would bolster reliability. Opponents said it would only raise prices. Ultimately, those bills failed after an unusual coalition of environmental, renewable, and business groups all opposed. Bryn Baker is Senior Policy Director for the Texas Energy Buyers Alliance, which opposed the bills.
This is about cost and reliability, just full stop. And if we're talking about making things more expensive, you've got a whole bunch of folks interested and concerned.
Instead, the state legislature did approve $5 billion additional dollars of state coin for the Texas Energy Fund. That money will help finance building new power plants and energy resilience projects in the state. And now we head to West Texas. Marfa Public Radio's Travis Bubenik has more on a bill that cracks down on what one lawmaker calls fly-by-night chemical storage facilities in the oil patch.
The new legislation comes after one of those facilities caught fire and polluted a West Texas neighborhood last year. The fire broke out near Odessa, at a small open-air facility that stored various oil industry-related chemicals in tall stacks of plastic tubs. Residents in a neighborhood next door said the fire led to a mysterious black sludge filling their homes and cars. Republican State Rep Brooks Landgraf responded with a bill that bans those types of facilities from being located within 2,000 feet of homes. It also sets up a state-run registration and inspections process. Landgraf called it an effort to protect people and to prevent another fire like the Odessa one. The bill doesn't require the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to start enforcing the ban until lawmakers approve funding for just that purpose. But it does allow the TCEQ to start enforcement using existing money. Barring a veto from the governor, it'll take effect in September. Lawmakers also passed another bill this session on a different top-of-mind issue for West Texas: orphan wells. These no longer in use oil and gas wells can lead to pollution. A bill also awaiting Abbott's signature creates new requirements for energy companies to deal with those wells. I'm Travis Bubenik in Marfa, along with
Mose Bushell in Austin.
And Brad Burt in Lubbock.
Well, besides energy and the environment, lawmakers also tried to take on the issue of wildfires in Texas, a perennial issue. A series of bills passed this year, hoping to better prepare the state for these disasters. The legislative package was inspired by the Smokehouse Creek Fire, the largest wildfire in Texas history. Back in early 2024, the Smokehouse Creek Fire scorched more than 1 million acres in the Panhandle. 3 people were killed. After that fire, a special House committee was formed to investigate the cause and make legislative recommendations. Here to tell us more, Jayme Lozano-Carver, who covers the Panhandle for the Texas Tribune. Jayme, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, David.
So tell us about some of the bills that lawmakers passed to address fires. Can you give us some of the top-line highlights?
Yeah, so, much of the legislation came from Senate Bill 34, which was very much a sweeping bill that addressed many of the concerns with wildfires. And this bill, it gives a boost to funding for volunteer fire stations that are in areas at high risk for wildfires. But it also creates a statewide database of firefighting equipment that would be available whenever a fire breaks out. And the bill also calls for a study to be done about wildfire risks and establish risk zones for homes and businesses.
One of the things that I keep hearing people talking about is, why do we have these power lines sticking up on poles in areas where we know these poles can snap and they're particularly vulnerable? Did lawmakers try to address that at all?
Yes, they did. So one bill, and it was written by Ken King, who is the representative for Canadian, where a lot of the damage took place. The bill that he wrote, it grants the Railroad Commission and the Public Utility Commission the authority to work together whenever the Railroad Commission does find a substandard power line. And this is a really big deal because, of course, whenever the wildfires took place last year, lawmakers heard that there's not exactly any regulatory authority over these power lines that are at oil well sites or, abandoned well sites and things like that. This was a big win for ranchers because this gives the Railroad Commission the authority to notify the Public Utility Commission and then the landowner. And then the two agencies will then request a state fire marshal or another local authority to inspect the site. And they can also request that the electric service is disconnected by the provider.
Okay, but it's my understanding that the Smokehouse Creek Fire was initially sparked by a power line that was not underground. Why are these power lines not underground? That's a question that I hear all the time.
Well, I think that if that were to be the case, we would likely see a lot of the issues that we see similarly with water infrastructure, where if it's something that's underground, we may not exactly have the best system to maintain that. And so while it doesn't seem, like the best idea to have a lot of these power lines strung up in the middle of nowhere, lining up to oil sites that aren't exactly examined on a daily basis, this is the way that the structure is set up for now. And what lawmakers can do going forward is exactly what Ken King's bill does, which is, grant the authority for state agencies to actually see what is going on out there.
So this was a bill that addressed what some lawmakers have been calling a regulatory no man's land, right?
Right, yes.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned at-risk zones. When will that study be complete?
So that study won't be complete until December 2026, which, of course, we are still fairly far out from that. But the reason for that is because the study does cover a lot of ground. This will also look at the projected loss of life. It will look at the financial impacts of recovering from a wildfire. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that just does take some time.
Anything additionally when it comes to legislation that didn't pass this session?
Yes, actually, there was one big proposal on the table by Representative King that would have created what's called the Texas Interoperability Council. Because believe it or not, there isn't a statewide network that connects all first responders and state agencies in Texas. So this bill would have led to the creation of that network. And even though the bill passed the House, it was never taken up by the Senate.
We've been speaking with Jayme Lozano-Carver, who covers the Panhandle for the Texas Tribune. We're going to have a link to her reporting on this at texasstandard.org. Jayme, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, let's turn now to Wells Dunbar, our social media editor, find out what Texans are talking about online. Hello, Wells.
Howdy, David. Sticking with the aftermath of the legislative session that wrapped this week, lots of talk online about a ban on sex or gender-based school clubs like gay straight student alliances on several campuses. As the Austin American-Statesman reports, Democrats warned that the prohibition would apply to things like Girl Scouts or Christians' men athletic groups as much as it would pride clubs, but feel that those groups for gay teens would end up being singled out. Well, on the Texas subreddit, one popular comment reads, "I'm curious about the details of the law because there's lots of ways groups could describe themselves that could get around this. A one-issue political club where the issue is LGBTQ rights, a history club focused on LGBTQ history, and so on." Lots more talk online on Reddit about what Redditors call malicious compliance, obeying the letter of the law while finding loopholes involving laws like this, or the legislature's 10 Commandments bill, and more. Some interesting discussions unfolding there, David. I'll be back with more from online later in the program.
Let us hear from you. Wells Dunbar's our social media editor, back in about 35 minutes or so. And coming up next, more on a devastating worm and why we should all be concerned.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UNT's online master's degree in Advanced Data Analytics program, preparing business professionals to shape the next generation of AI business solutions. More at online.unt.edu/data analytics. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, committed to strengthening the state's workforce and its communities through safety and wellness grants and education initiatives. More at texasmutual.com/community impact.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Ranchers are potentially facing a big problem from a tiny insect. It's called the New World screwworm, and the larvae burrow into the skin of animals like cattle, sheep, and deer, causing illness and even death. They were eliminated from North America decades ago, but now they're on their way back. The Texas Standard's Michael Marks talked with some ranchers who remember what it was like to fight them.
New World screwworms, which are actually flies, are more than just a nuisance. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that their absence saves the American economy nearly $3 billion a year. So how does a rancher who grew up dealing with screwworms feel about their possible return?
Terrified. Absolutely terrified. I'm glad you brought that up.
That's Chuck Schmidt, who raises cattle in Central Texas. He and I are watching his cows graze in a rocky pasture with their new calves. Back when screwworms were a problem, these babies would have been born earlier during the cooler months.
Old school, you calved in the wintertime, okay? And you calved in the wintertime because screwworm flies weren't active.
Ranchers would also wait until winter to castrate or dehorn their cattle, since anything involving blood could attract the flies. Their whole calendar revolved around managing the pest. And this is a foreign idea today.
There's a lot of people my age and younger involved in the cattle business, and they have not experienced screwworm.
That's Michael Kelsey, Executive Vice President of the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association. Screwworms were eliminated from the U.S. in 1966, although there were flare-ups through the late 70s. When they were here, livestock required constant monitoring. Kelsey remembers talking to an older rancher about checking for screwworms in the 30s and 40s.
His job every day for 8 months out of the year was he would ride through the cattle, and if he saw any that had screwworm infection, then he roped them, and then he had saddlebags of different types of drugs and different types of treatments that he would use to treat those cattle.
Treating cattle for screwworms is unpleasant. There was a specially developed medication called Smear 62 that many ranchers would use. Brothers John and Jim Carney remember using the Vaseline-like salve on the Central Texas ranches their father managed.
So you would apply it with a swab into the wound.
First you try to pick the worms out with maybe a stick or something. Try to pick as many out, and then you take this stuff and wad in your hand and work it all in there.
What did it smell like?
Oh, God, it was
horrible. Rotten flesh smell. Yeah.
Entomologists first pushed the insects out of the U.S. by dropping sterilized screwworms from airplanes. That lowered their populations and contained the insect at the border of Panama and Colombia. But they've broken through that barrier and moved over 1,000 miles north into Mexico. If they reach the U.S., Jim Carney thinks they could devastate cattle here.
If all of a sudden they returned and there were no efforts to control them and they were to come back like they were, it would put 90% of the cattle people out of business.
There are efforts to control them, though. In May, U.S. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins suspended cattle imports from Mexico indefinitely. Keeping screwworms out of the country and pushing them back down to Panama will require more sterilized flies, though. Again, here's Michael Kelsey from the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association.
The biggest thing we need to do right now in our minds is start producing more of the sterile male flies. And in order to do that, we need at least one, maybe two, perhaps even three, depending upon how far along this goes, production facilities.
Right now, the only facility in the world that makes the flies is in Panama, but there is a bipartisan bill in Congress that would create one in the United States. The bill is still awaiting a hearing. For the Texas Standard, I'm Michael Myers.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Well, farmers have been taking on more debt of late after years of really low levels of borrowing. At the end of last year, the volume of farm loans not related to real estate was up 25% compared to a year earlier. That trend continued in the first quarter of this year. Is the increased use of debt a sign of a financial downturn in the ag sector? Harvest Public Media contributor Will Bauer has been exploring that question.
To understand the current ag economy, let's start with what got us here. Why are farmers using more loans than they have been? Tate Berg is an economist with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. He also farms himself.
When the ag economy is doing really well and farm income is up, farm loan demand goes down. And as the farm economy struggles, the farm loan demand goes up. So we're kind of seeing a little bit of both.
And he's watching those numbers closely. The Minneapolis Fed just put out a report showing loan demand is up. Berg says farm income is down for a few reasons. The main one is commodity prices have dropped quite a bit over the last 3 years. For example, soybeans sold at just shy of $18 per bushel when they peaked in 2022. Now it's less than $11. And Berg says that's coupled with high input costs.
It makes it really tough, so there's a squeeze on both sides of the equation.
Fertilizer and ag equipment are some of the things that have been pricey, and that's led to greater need for loans, according to Nate Kaufman. He's an economist with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City.
The concern would be if this type of environment, meaning reduced profit margins, persists for some amount of time, a year, 2 years, 3 years, you could envision some scenarios where it does lead to more financial stress.
For some farmers, these trends are already creating stress.
This should process out. There's 32 turkeys here, and it should process out to like between 350 to 400 pounds of ground turkey.
Anna Morell is showing me her farm. She also raises chickens for meat. She has ducks, geese, and chickens for eggs and grows tons of produce.
And they make the funniest sounds.
All to be sold at farmers markets in central Illinois. Morell also serves as the president of the Central Illinois Young Farmers Coalition. While standing inside a new barn, she says these conditions are extra tough, especially on young farmers.
There's not a ton of money to go around for farmers right now. And right now with federal freeze and tariffs, I'm not quite sure how we're all going to fare.
Morell says she feels fortunate that she and her husband don't have a loan for anything on the farm right now, but they do have plans to expand, and that could require financing. Tariffs also might mean higher prices on things like feed. Morell says she's been able to avoid raising prices on her eggs for several years. That might have to change.
But then also we want to balance being able to serve our community, serve people who may not be able to afford our higher prices. And even if personally not financing anything right now, tariffs are definitely going to be a concern.
However, there are some that believe more loans aren't necessarily a sign of a weakening ag economy. Roger McOwen is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at Washburn University School of Law in Kansas.
Yeah, the debt levels look high, but your underlying asset values are also high. Those have not deteriorated, which means you still have the ability to pay your debt.
Land values, for instance, remain high, so a common benchmark economists consider the debt-to-asset ratio is in good shape. That's also true for what's called the current ratio, or a farmer's ability to pay their debt, McOwen says.
They're not necessarily incurring more debt because they're behind on things, and the current ratios tell me that. The debt-to-asset ratios tell me that. They're not borrowing because they're in trouble. They're borrowing because they're anticipating greater investment/sales later on.
While farmers keep a close eye on tariffs and their bottom lines, ag economists will be watching whether farmers keep making their loan payments on time. For Harvest Public Media, I'm Will Bauer.
Harvest Public Media is a collaboration of public media newsrooms in the Midwest and Great Plains, including the Texas Standard.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Alexandra Hart. Texas has abruptly ended a 24-year-old law giving in-state tuition to college students without legal status. KERA's Bill Ziebel says it came after a lawsuit from the Department of Justice.
The DOJ filed a complaint to block a 23-year-old Texas law that gives college students here without legal status in-state tuition. Attorney General Pam Bondi said in a statement that violates federal law. In Texas, about 8% of the state's nearly 700,000 students in public colleges lack legal status, according to the nonprofit President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. The policy targeted by the DOJ dates from 2001.
Texas was the first state to offer in-state tuition to students without legal status. Governor Greg Abbott has signed one of the largest public education funding bills in state history. The Texas Newsroom's Lucio Vasquez has more.
House Bill 2 includes $4.2 billion for teacher and staff raises. It also dedicates nearly $2 billion to revamp special education and expand access to full-day pre-K and early learning programs. An additional $43 million is set aside for school safety. Governor Greg Abbott signed the bill at Salado High School north of Austin, alongside lawmakers and local educators.
Texas is number one in so many categories. Texas should be number one in educating our children.
This comes just months after Abbott declared teacher pay as one of his top priorities during this year's legislative session. Most of the law will take place in September, though some parts will roll out next year. I'm Lucio Vasquez in Houston.
A group of Black and Latino voters in Tarrant County is suing over a controversial new commissioner's court map. As KERA's Miranda Suarez reports, the federal lawsuit says the new map is racially discriminatory.
The Republican majority on the Tarrant County Commissioners Court approved the new map Tuesday over the protests of Democrats. All three conservative commissioners have been open about their partisan goals here. They said they wanted to redraw the court's precinct maps to help add another Republican commissioner. The lawsuit accuses them of packing Black and Latino voters into a single district to make the others more GOP friendly. Republican commissioners have previously denied that race played any role in the redistricting process. According to experts, mapmakers can consider race. It just can't be the only consideration. I'm Miranda Suarez in Fort Worth.
The University of Texas women are one game away from winning the College Softball World Series. They defeated Texas Tech 2-1 yesterday and will go for the decisive win this afternoon in Oklahoma City. I'm Alexandra Hart from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from the Center for Professional Education at UT Austin, offering online certificate programs in project management, leadership, and more. Details at professionaled.utexas.edu.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm Angela Kocherga. Pre-exposure prophylaxis, known as PrEP, has been one tool for reducing HIV transmission rates in the United States. When taken as prescribed, it diminishes the risk of getting HIV from sex by about 99%. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, HIV infections have declined about 12% overall between 2018 and 2022, and that's attributed at least partially to the availability of PrEP medication. So why is one Texas doctor suing to stop federal health care programs from covering the medication? The case, Kennedy versus Braidwood, is now before the U.S. Supreme Court, which is expected to issue a ruling in the coming weeks. Sam Levin is a correspondent for The Guardian U.S., and he's been following the latest in the case. He joins us now. Sam, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, first, remind us what exactly PrEP does and when the preventative medication became common for health care plans to cover it.
PrEP is an HIV prevention medication that is widely used across the country and the world, and it has been approved for use for years under the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, and has had huge progress in helping prevent the spread of HIV and reducing new transmission of HIV.
So tell us more about why this Texas-based doctor is filing a lawsuit. What is he hoping to accomplish and why?
So Dr. Stephen Hotze has spent years targeting PrEP access and targeting LGBTQ plus healthcare more broadly. He has argued that it is religious discrimination for the government to require that private employers like him cover PrEP through their healthcare plans, through their company. And so he has been fighting this battle for years. And at this point in the case has focused on a more technical argument about essentially the task force in the government that recommends this care, arguing that that task force is not constitutional. And so that's the issue before the Supreme Court. But more broadly, he's targeting preventative healthcare services coverage through the Affordable Care Act, which is care that millions, tens of millions of Americans rely on.
Well, what do public health officials say about how this would impact HIV prevention and treatment efforts?
There was a Yale study in 2023 that estimated the loss of free PrEP coverage could result in more than 2,000 preventable HIV infections within 1 year. And more broadly, the loss of this access to free preventative health care could lead to 39 million people losing access to these threatened services. So the case started as a case that was focused on PrEP, but it ended up expanding much more broadly to a wide range of areas of coverage that people depend on: cancer screenings, diabetes screenings, help for obesity interventions, STI screenings, counseling for alcohol use, contraception, vaccinations, medications to reduce heart disease risks. All of this, which many people have come to rely on as getting free access through their healthcare plans, are threatened by this case.
Is there any indication how the court may rule?
The court expressed some skepticism in oral arguments earlier this year, so for advocates, there's some hope that a ruling might go in their favor and that PrEP coverage will continue to be maintained through this ruling. But it remains to be seen. We've obviously seen the courts have repeatedly ruled against LGBTQ rights more broadly, and there were some conservative justices who seem to be siding with this doctor and with the folks who are arguing against access to this care. And so it is an open question how this case will be resolved.
Either way, depending on the ruling, what are advocates most concerned about going forward?
I think if you talk to advocates for, HIV prevention, access and this work, regardless of the outcome of this case, they're looking more broadly at the just increasing attacks on healthcare access and on LGBT rights more broadly. And so even if in this case, this specific provision of the Affordable Care Act remains in effect, there's widespread concern about other ways in which the federal government under the Trump administration is targeting LGBTQ rights at the federal level. And so looking at employment discrimination and looking at access to this healthcare through other means and looking at all these ways in which trans people in particular and the queer community more broadly is being targeted by this government, there are great concerns. And I think there's all these different avenues in which folks will be watching the aftermath of this case, regardless of the outcome.
Sam Levin is a correspondent for Guardian U.S., and we'll have a link to his reporting at texasstandard.org. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Galveston Historical Foundation, celebrating Juneteenth. As Juneteenth's birthplace, visitors can explore exhibits, tours, and events honoring the legacy of freedom all month long. More at galvestonhistory.org/Juneteenth 2025.
It's not just about the brisket or the ribs or the sausage or even the sides. It's the culture and people who are passionate about it. Where there's smoke, there's Daniel Vaughn, Texas Monthly Barbecue Editor. Join us next Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Where There's Smoke comes from H-E-B.
This is the Texas Standard. I'm Danny Thomas with Alamo Drafthouse. This summer, Alamo is bringing back Jaws on the Water in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Jaws. I mean, Jaws is iconic, right? It put Spielberg on everybody's radar. It was terrifying. It had a global impact on how sharks are perceived and treated. I am a little bit too young to have seen it in the theater, but my mom did, and it made a lasting impression on her. And it created an entire subgenre of films, sharksploitation movies, and how they're made and how we interact with nature after seeing certain films. It's all been affected by this movie 50 years ago. So we'll have the tubes on Lake Travis, the 40-foot screen waterside, and maybe some divers pulling on toes. Jaws is terrifying enough as it is, but floating in relatively open water, there's nothing like it. I mean, there's a reason why this event is internationally recognized as the way to watch Jaws. You can't get this experience anywhere else. We even go as far as setting off fireworks when the boat explodes. We really, really want to make this feel like you're experiencing what they're experiencing on screen as much as possible. People travel from all over the states, if not the world, actually, to come to Jaws on the Water. It trended #1 on Facebook internationally the first year we did it. And we were on the Today Show this year, and Mario Lopez has one of the tubes. Like, it's a big deal. And we used to do 8 to 10 of these a summer with 800 tickets at each one. And this year we're only doing 4 events. We have one this Saturday, June 7th, and then basically every other Saturday through July 26th. And then that's it. It's the last time. This is Danny Thomas, Senior Event Producer for Alamo Drafthouse, and you are listening to the Texas Standard.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Angela Kocherga. If recent news reports are right, the streets of Austin could soon play host to a new fleet of autonomous taxicabs, this one featuring Tesla vehicles. Austin riders can already hail a driverless Uber, and the city has been a popular test bed for other self-driving startups. So how will Tesla fare on the streets of the capital city? And is the company's technology well-suited to the demands of an urban taxi service? Our tech expert Omar Gallaga has a few answers for us. Omar, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, what do we know or think we know about Tesla's plans for self-driving taxis in Austin?
Well, recently we were seeing reports that Tesla is going to launch its robo-taxi service in Austin on June 12th. That was the date that we've seen, although that could move back, that could slide. And they're looking at about 10 to 20 vehicles, probably Tesla Model Y vehicles that have been outfitted for self-driving. So that is kind of what the launch looks like. But as you mentioned, there's already other services in town that have been doing this. So Tesla would be entering a market for this and offering this, but and it's not going to be these kind of futuristic looking cars that Tesla had been talking about, these robo taxis and these robo buses that they had shown off designs of. These are going to be kind of existing Tesla vehicles.
So Tesla has confirmed that this is happening.
Yeah, Elon Musk posted on X that the company has been testing this out with no drivers in Texas. This was a couple weeks ago that he mentioned this, and so it has definitely been in the testing phase. But as far as when the date that it will actually roll out, they haven't actually confirmed that.
Well, right now people can book an autonomous ride in Austin, and here's what it sounded like when Shelley, our producer, tried it out.
Hey, Shelley. Heading to 300 West Dean Keegan Street. Please make sure your seatbelt is fastened. For any questions, press the call support button to speak with a rider support agent.
So Omar, tell us about that existing service, the Waymo-Uber partnership in Austin.
Yeah, Waymo is using kind of Alphabet or Google, if you will, technology and partnering with Uber, and that is the one that I think is the most high profile and most well known. It's in other cities. I rode one in Phoenix one time. They're on the West Coast, so that is like up and going and operational, and you see those around in Austin. There's a few others. Amazon has a service called Zoox that it has been testing out since last year. Volkswagen has one called ADMT, and there's a startup called AV Ride. All of these are still in the testing phase. I think that Waymo is the only one that is really kind of up and running and kind of past the testing phase. So Tesla's efforts would join that one as kind of the two primary self-driving taxis in town.
So have there been any issues with these autonomous vehicle programs?
Well, it depends on who you ask. Forbes put out an article recently saying that this effort from Tesla is a disaster waiting to happen, is the way they described it. And a lot of people have been concerned because Tesla's self-driving technology, they're sort of in kind of an ongoing dialogue with the NHTSA about their safety records, just the number of fatalities and incidents that have been reported, not around the robotaxi service, but just around their self-driving technology in general, what's called FSD, or full self-driving, and Tesla's autopilot. So that has been an ongoing dialogue. The NHTSA has been requesting information from Tesla and given them a June 19th deadline to submit information. So around that issue, there's a lot of concern about, are these robotaxis going to be safe, based on their track record with autopilot and FSD.
Do cities in Texas or even the state have a way to regulate autonomous cars or ride-hailing specifically?
Yeah, ride-hailing regulations have been all over the place. But as far as self-driving cars, the state did issue a law in 2017 that prohibits individual municipalities from regulating it. So it is kind of a wide open field in Texas, and that's why we're seeing a lot of the testing of these services happening here.
So one difference between Tesla's self-driving vehicles and most others is that Tesla does not use the LiDAR sensors. Those are the lights you see on top of Waymo vehicles. In autonomous mode, Tesla uses cameras instead. Could this difference in technology pose any challenge on Austin streets?
Yeah, again, it depends on which expert you ask. When Tesla first started doing self-driving, they did use LiDAR sensors. And then at some point, Elon Musk decided, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do kind of camera-based sensors. And his reasoning was, well, if humans can drive safely, and that's up for debate, with just their vision, so should these cars. And it's also less expensive to do it that way. And there are some experts that would say that actually does work well and is preferable. But yeah, Waymo relies on the radar sensors, which, to my mind, is like, if you could do it better than humans, why not do it that way? So, but yeah, it really depends on which self-driving expert you ask on which one is preferable.
Omar Gallaga has not pulled up to the Texas Standard studio in an autonomous car yet, but maybe it's just a matter of time. Omar, thank you so much.
I sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the Texas College Savings Plan, administered by the state of Texas. Families can save for tuition, room and board, books, and other qualified education expenses at eligible schools nationwide. Learn more at texascollegesavings.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Angela Kocherga. A bill requiring Texas sheriffs to help Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agents, is headed for the governor's desk. In the original bill, the cooperation was voluntary, but now it mandates Texas sheriffs enter into agreements with ICE and allocate the necessary staff and funding to carry out immigration enforcement. Francesca D'Annunzio is an investigative reporting fellow for the Texas Observer, and she's been following Senate Bill 8. Francesca, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Hi, Angela. Thanks so much for having me.
So first, tell us a little bit about how the bill changed from the Senate to the House, and finally, what's landing on the governor's desk for his signature.
So Senate Bill 8, when it was originally introduced, included some language pertaining to 287G agreements that some advocates found unclear. The original language in the bill would have required sheriffs in counties of 100,000 residents or more to apply for a 287G agreement and as offered, the as offered is important here, accept what ICE proposed. And that language changed and was not in the next bill. And so in the House version of the bill, which was overhauled on Memorial Day weekend, would have required all county sheriffs to apply only for the most limited 287G agreement, the one that's the most limited in scope and only occurs in jail settings. And it would apply to all county law enforcement. But the author of the bill in the Senate, Charles Schwertner, did not go for that. And the bill once again changed after Memorial Day weekend. It changed in conference committee before the legislature's deadline for bills, and the population restriction was not reintroduced. So it again applied to all county sheriffs, regardless of population, but it no longer applies to only jail-based enforcement.
Well, what's the types of agreements that the sheriffs have to enter into going forward? Some do involve handing over people already booked into jails, but there's also this so-called task force model. Explain a little bit about the differences.
Okay, so 287G, there are three types of agreements, and two of them are limited to jails, and they're relatively limited in scope. But the third form of a 287G agreement with ICE, which is called the task force model, essentially allows local police to be roving ICE agents in their communities if they've been trained under 287G. Now that model was retired under the Obama administration after national controversy by the hands of then Maricopa County's in Arizona, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and then also some incidents that happened with a sheriff in North Carolina. And both the federal government and academics found rampant racial profiling as a result of the task force model agreement. Now this year, the Trump administration has brought back the task force model, which really worries advocates because of its history of racial profiling. And in Texas, there are almost 20 agencies that have signed task force model specific agreements. Now, most of those are small sheriff's offices, but the Attorney General's office and the Texas National Guard have also signed task force model agreements. and 2 populous counties. One is Rockwall, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's a suburban county. And the other one is Smith County, which is home to Tyler, Texas, and around 245,000 people.
Well, you mentioned these larger counties. Funding for these agreements has been an issue, a concern. What happens if these large counties fail to cover the cost?
The bill actually accounts for that. The bill includes funding on a tiered basis based on population for counties that participate in 287G. They can be reimbursed up to, several tens of thousands of dollars based off of how many people live in the county.
And that funding would be federal government, or the state would be covering that?
The state would be covering that. It's not clear if that would come out of the state budget or if that would come from the federal government, but it would be allocated by the state.
Well, finally, are there consequences if a county says, well, I don't want to go that far, and it sounds like it's being mandated? What could happen?
Counties aren't required to sign the task force model agreement. They could just apply for the jail-based model. The bill doesn't specify what kind of agreement sheriffs have to apply for or accept. But if a sheriff declines to accept something offered by ICE or declines to apply, the Attorney General could prosecute law enforcement for that.
We've been speaking to Francesca D'Annunzio, investigative reporting fellow at the Texas Observer. We'll have a link to her reporting at texasstandard.org. Francesca, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard.
Wells Dunbar is our social media editor, and Wells, I don't know if you're seeing some breaking news from the Supreme Court today. Looks like a closely watched case involving our neighbors to the south of the Lone Star State, Mexico. They'd brought a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the American gun industry. On this Thursday, the Supreme Court decided unanimously that the lawsuit is barred by an act of Congress, a 2005 federal law. Justice Elena Kagan writing for the majority. I think that's something of a surprise that it was a unanimous opinion there. But the unanimous Supreme Court throwing out Mexico's lawsuit against the gun industry. There had been this thing about gun running, and the allegation had been that kind of collusion among American gun makers to run guns into Mexico. Apparently, that lawsuit has been barred.
Yes, so, apparently, asking there for $10 billion, but being rejected, as you said, unanimously by the High Court. So, but of course, not the only Supreme Court decision. I was just reading earlier. Yeah, we're in for a raft of Supreme Court decisions as the summer is begun in earnest, and the court is winding down. So we're going to have some real doozies coming down the pipeline, many of which are related, of course, to the present administration. We were just hearing about the controversy surrounding these ICE actions in Texas and across the country. On Facebook, one of our listeners shared a viral video of an ICE arrest in Massachusetts that escalated with dozens of police and law enforcement officials on site. The text to that video says, "Imagine if this level of force, coordination, and urgency was used to find rapists, to stop domestic abusers, to protect women and children trying to live, not run. Instead, a 16-year-old girl and her mother slammed to the ground and dragged away by ICE. No warrant, no ID, just fear." And I've also seen, that's fascinating because that does raise another interesting point here. So many of these ICE actions that we've seen across the country, pretty much everyone that I've seen, go viral online. These are masked people, masked men, most times in plain clothes, most times with no, ID or identification attached to them at all. So it does raise a disturbing question over, what if this was not an ICE enforcement, which, people would argue would be traumatic in and of itself. But what if this wasn't? What if this was some third party? What if this was some bad actor seeking to just essentially abduct someone off the street? Concerning action, to be sure, and just one of many stories that we're keeping an eye on. But yeah, sounds like we're out of time here, David, so we'll have to pick this one up tomorrow.
Does indeed. Wells Dunbar is monitoring the talk of Texas. You can keep up with the news 24/7 over at our website, texasstandard.org. Managing editor of The Standard is Gabriel Munoz. Our managing producer is Laura Rice. Our executive producer is Rhonda Fanning. We're going to be back here for the big broadcast tomorrow, and we hope you can join us.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare. the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington Family, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. Support for Texas Standard comes from UNT's online master's degree in Advanced Data Analytics program, preparing business professionals to shape the next generation of AI business solutions. More at online.unt.edu/data analytics.